got our video there, right? And automatically posts it to our podcast.
All right, so you got to be straight. Yeah.
Right, because it's just about cutting
And how long have you been doing
simplicity.
podcasts? For a while now?
A number of months now. That wasn't there from the start.
Okay.
That wasn't there from the start. Now all of our services are on there now because we went back retroactively.
So you went back and added them. So
Yeah.
it seems like you've been on podcast for a while. Yeah.
And you never know, like, someone will be like, I listened to you on the ride home. It's like,
Yeah,
well, that's great.
everyone's on podcasts.
Right.
Yeah.
So take
You gotta
advantage.
hit all those different
It's not
outlets,
hard
man.
anymore. I just feel like we complicate things too much because, and I did it too because I'm accustomed to what I was doing 5 years ago.
And now everything's connected. It's easy.
So, and I want to do it so that I can leave, right? Because when I need to go plan to church someplace or whatever,
set up for
it's
what
set up.
comes.
Anybody can do it. So to me, yeah, I can do more things. There's more bells and whistles. But if I complicate it, it'll fall apart. Keep it simple, and that's good teaching, right? It's still better than what most people are doing, to be honest. And when you want to do more, this system will allow you to do anything you want. So we're designing like customized intro videos, animated music, living water. That'll come on in our sanctuary.
Everyone started following you. We're streaming. We're recording. You got 3 minutes and counting.
So you gotta
And then
have
Boyan
something
will
to
come
say.
up.
Agora eu conheço o pastor. Eu conheço o pastor.
Boyan, right at 5 seconds for him to walk out.
Yes.
Aos que são beneficiados.
Would you mind whoever stays here?
Well, yeah, sure, of course. Are you staying for this one? Or are you going to one of the other ones? Or you're done? You're leaving now?
Yes.
I said you got the. Yeah.
12 pessoas cada sábado.
Oh no, you're waiting. What are you doing at church? Like, do you have a role, position, or anything, or you're just
4 ou
helping
5.
out?
Se não estiver,
Yeah. Like, come on. Let me be me. Okay, so they require
Já está
glasses.
começando aí as coisas, tá?
Like, do you help out with social media or anything? Media there?
Thank you, Nilma.
Maybe you should try to tell them, hey, let's get on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. Let's do something, and maybe
see
that way helps
people
you.
from Silver
You
Spring.
start learning, and you're helping the church get on social media too. So I think that'd be good for you, and for the church as well. So think about it, man. That'll be cool. Because if they don't have anything, I don't think they have anything, right? I don't think Hyde still has anything. Yeah, I'm always constantly searching who's got what, because most people are like, if you're not present online, you don't exist.
Go to Steve now.
Yeah.
Vai pro Steve.
Let's see, Hyde's got
Aqui tem o Steve, que vai falar sobre construindo time forte. Aí tem o Tim, que vai falar sobre
They have YouTube, and they
discipleship.
have their website, which most
E
Adventist
tem
churches have
ele
something
aqui que
similar.
vai falar sobre
have no
missão e
page.
visão, que é interessante
That's the
também.
YouTube. That's it.
Não sei.
Yeah, I know they record, pretty sure they just post.
Yeah, so it goes to YouTube. So maybe you can help them create Facebook, Instagram, okay, and connect it with the YouTube. So the YouTube videos you can post them on Facebook as well. Because that way you guys can start impacting more people and reaching more people. Because you can reach so many people with just your
All right. It will be recorded, yes.
You need us to talk to
All right. We are going to begin. If you did not get a handout, be sure you reach out to Anne to get a handout.
But yeah, if we can help talk to Pastor
And
Tom.
I don't have the signal here. If you don't mind just being sure that this is all the tech guy. Switch to a different input. Let's do that. All right. Okay, we're good? All right. So we're going to take here the next few minutes to look at how to create a compelling vision. Before we move to the how-to, I want to just do a quick review of what we looked at this morning, and that is, what does a vision really do for us? The 4 C's of a compelling vision. Number 1, compelling vision, we said, creates a clear picture, direction of where we are going. Basically, what does God's mission look in our context right here? A compelling vision also helps us connect our passions with God's vision. A compelling vision pushes us or compels us into action was the 3rd C. And the 4th one is a compelling vision brings a clarity. Basically, it says it helps us focus on what matters, what we should do, and helps us know what to eliminate and what we should not do. But once we know what a compelling vision is, how do we build it up in our existing church, in our existing congregation? The big challenge that we face today is this, that 96% of the U.S. churches, of all the churches, not just Adventists, but all the churches in America, they have never reproduced themselves. What this really is telling us is that none of these churches, 96% of the churches, had a compelling vision for planting. They might have had other visions, but church planting wasn't part of it. So the reality is that me and you are going to be a part of a church that doesn't have church planting as part of their vision. And this is why, again, we brought up the question, how do we build that compelling vision in our context, in our existing church, the church that doesn't have church planting as part of their overall mission strategy. So in order to illustrate that, I choose to use this acronym, and the acronym is summarized in this word, picture, because vision is a picture, right? So that's why we are going to use this acronym. The P in this acronym stands for starting to draw a picture of the future. So in order for me as a leader, as a pastor or a church leader to build a compelling vision in my church, I need to start drawing a picture of what the future would look like if we incorporate church planting into it. How do we do that? First, we do it through messaging. What does that mean? Preaching. The messages that we cover every single week at church or at our weekly gatherings need to start focusing on mission and multiplication and planting. Why? Because that was God's dream. What did Jesus do when he came and lived here on this earth? In his ministry, he reached out to the people trying to share the gospel message, but in the same time, what was he doing with the 12 disciples around him? He was multiplying himself. So multiplication was part of that vision and mission that Jesus was really promoting in his interaction with the people. By the way, then the 12 disciples were turned into 70, right? You remember how Jesus kept multiplying the impact that he had by passing this message about multiplication, which is in the heart of church planting. The other big thing that Jesus was spreading around to his disciples as he was training them was his passion for ministry and mission. Everything that Jesus did was related to his passion for loving people and making a difference in their lives. So the messaging we need to start bringing as a first step as we begin to draw this picture of what our work as a church will look like if church planting was a part of it and multiplication becomes a part of our overall evangelism and strategic vision, is to start constantly talking about being missional, living missional lives as individuals, as a church. What does that look like? God's passion for lost people, that even if we have a packed church, if we don't continue to reach out to new and lost people or unchurched people, we are failing the passion of Jesus. We start messaging this through the sermons, through the prayer meetings, any of a type of a gathering that we have in the church needs to emphasize that message. Once again, why do we do that? In 1 Corinthians chapter 3, Paul says, by the grace of God has given me, I have laid a foundation as a wise builder, as someone else is building on it. But each one should build with care, for no one can lay any foundation other than the one already laid, which is Jesus Christ. And then he goes on to say, if you build on anything else, but Jesus is the foundation, and his passion for mission and bringing the unchurched people back in a relationship, saving relationship with him, your ministry and my ministry will fail. It is a biblical message that we need to keep on emphasizing. We need to ask ourselves this question as we bring this message to the people. What would Jesus or Paul or any of the disciples talk about or focus on in their ministry if they were right here, walking in our shoe steps today, right? Because really, if Jesus and Paul or any of the disciples were here today, their focus will be most probably a lot different than ours. It will always be focused on the unchurched, bringing them into an experience of God and falling in love with him and making a decision to become his followers. So once again, as we talk about us living missional lives as a church, being focused on the unchurched people, we need to also talk as leaders, as pastors, about the idea that church planting is not a different vision than the one the church should have, but it is a vision that is a part of the outreach, evangelism, and mission that the church already believes in. Church planting is, in other words, almost equivalent to outreach and evangelism. Why is that? Because if we evangelize, what happens? We have greater and greater number of people, disciples who join the ministry. And as those disciples join the ministry, what happens is we will need to build new communities. And new communities will happen not only in the immediate area where we live, but they will spread out to other areas, other towns, and other demographic groups where the gospel hasn't been taken to before. And the last aspect in this messaging that we need to bring, besides emphasizing that we need to be missional, that we need to live with the passion of Jesus, to focus on the unchurched, that we need to live our lives the way Jesus, the disciples, and Paul would live them if they were here, is also thinking about the whole idea that just as the apostolic church was focused on mission, so was the Adventist church, right? When it started. It wasn't supposed to be one congregation that kept growing in one space. They were spreading the message throughout the whole country. There were new churches starting. In fact, every pastor we know from the Adventist history was challenged in order to prove that they are called by God to multiply, start new congregations in other areas. So if we want to become an apostolic church, get back to the apostolic movement, if we want to get back to what the Adventist church used to be, the Adventist movement, we need to follow God's dream of not only focus on the unchurched, but also spread out to new areas and new demographic groups. The message we emphasize in our preaching, in our spiritual conversations in church, will drive the vision that the church will adopt. If you want the church to have a missional contagious vision, compelling vision for church planting, we need to be talking about the missional life of Jesus, the apostles, and the early Adventist church in spreading the gospel to new areas and new demographic groups. So here is a couple of questions to ask. By the way, in your handout, you will see after every point, there are these suggestive questions to ask of your leaders and also ask of yourself. A couple of them are, do you believe that the God of Israel, the God of the Gospels, the God of the Apostolic Church, and the God of the Book of Acts is still the powerful and passionate God to connect unchurched people with himself today? And of course, the answer is of course. God is still as passionate about those who are not part of our church community as he was in the time of Jesus or in the Old Testament since the fall of the human race. Another question to ask is, do you believe that Jesus and God the Father are still as passionate about the lost around the world, and are they still as passionate to have communities where these unchurched and lost people can experience his love? And the answer again is, of course. Because what new church communities are designed to do is to be that environment, that space where people can experience the love of Jesus and who he is. Because God's presence, God's character, God's love is experienced through people. Not through reading, but through interaction with believers and Christ followers. Okay, then we get to the second one, is we build the issue. The first one was create a picture, keep messaging. What does it mean to be missional, to multiply, to live our lives the way Jesus did, and church planting was an inseparable part of it. The second letter in that acronym, I, stands from start influencing your key leaders and members. What does that mean? Okay, we talked about messaging. It's not only messaging from the platform, but this is messaging. We need to start influencing our key leaders also in our messaging at leadership meetings. What is one of our typical leadership meetings that we have? Every church has it. Board meetings, right? What do we do in board meetings? We talk about this whole idea of living missional lives, living the way Jesus did, just looking for more ways to spread the gospel and connect with the unchurched. As we build this passion in leadership meetings, it starts to impact the minds of our leaders, starts reminding them of what hopefully brought them into the church, the passion to spread the gospel to those who don't know about it. Also, in visitations, okay, when we visit with our members, or even one-on-one with our leaders in their homes, what I choose to do is I always bring out the idea of mission, church planting, and multiplication there. Why? Because I want them to start thinking as people who want to see discipleship happen and who want to see leadership being multiplied and the influence of our church in our community be multiplied in other areas in our city or in our state or just beyond the borders of the influence of our local congregation. So use leadership meetings, visitations to make that impact on your leaders through messaging. Also, look at your church calendar, existing church calendar, and see, is it really a missional calendar? What do we mean by that? I want to show you this chart that one of my life kind of mentors as I was a young pastor shared with us, and I've adapted it a little bit, but it goes to his credit. He said there are these 7 types of major events that the church should always be sure to have. You have awareness event, which is really an event where you let the community know that you are there. They just know, hey, Beltsville Church. Oh, okay, we know. They hear about your name, if it's the Beltsville Church. If it's the, Rockville Korean Church, or, whatever your church name is, it lets people know I'm here. You don't talk to them about the religion or anything. You just let them know I'm here. It's an awareness event. Another type of an event is an entry event, which means now it's an entry point where the community can interact with the church. No religion yet. It's basically just, give me an example of an entry event that you can think of. Health, sure. You know, a seminar on losing weight. Okay, does the Bible talk about losing weight, by the way? Not that I know of, even though I did go attend a seminar where one of the great doctors in the Tarrant County in the South Fort Worth area, he brought Bible verses on that, but I think it was a stretch, okay? So I'm not even going to quote them. You know, but we're connecting with the community in a way that serves them, lets them know we are here. No religion there. It's an entry point for us to start interacting. Then bridge will be the next step. Now, okay, we're talking about health, but what does the Bible teach about health? Or parenting, what does the Bible teach about parenting? We're bridging them now to the gospel. Then we move to more of a discipleship, a decision-making event. That will be more like a Bible class where people have an opportunity to make a decision to commit their life to God. Then a simulation event is an event that gets them involved into the church, helps them find their spiritual gifts, you know. Then we move them into training events, teaching them how to do ministry and all that. And then the circle continues, and in the middle are the social events because they can function as almost any of these type of events, okay? Here is why I'm bringing this up again. We talked about the calendar, right? Does your church calendar reflect this, has elements of each one of these missional type of events? Why are they important? Because the people that come in contact with our church are at different levels of their spiritual walk, right? Some are non-believers, others are kind of, they believe in a God, but they're not really committed. Others are committed people, and others just need a push to become more dedicated to being disciples of Jesus. If you have this variety of events in your church, it will allow different people to connect with your church in a different way. So as you look at your church calendar with your leaders, remember, we're trying to let them know why should we think about multiplying and church planting. We're bringing this whole idea, we're reviving the culture of mission with every one of our leaders. Now they're thinking mission. Are we reaching to all these people? Is this part, you know, of who we are as a church? Some questions you can ask with them. By the way, in your handout, anytime you see a question highlighted in a kind of yellowish, brownish color, those are the questions that now you are targeting your leaders to think not only missional, but to think church planting, okay? So here is the first question. What would Jesus do to reach the unchurched areas in our city? Okay, as we're talking about church events in our calendar, I'll ask my leaders, by the way, if Jesus was here, what would he do to reach the areas that we haven't tapped into yet? What am I doing? We're still thinking church ministry, but I'm pushing them to think beyond just us here, all right? Another question to ask, would you be happy if we met 5 years from now at this very spot and we were at the same place as the church? We have same mission success. You know what most churches will say? We are not going to be happy because what's happening is not what should be happening in our churches when we talk about mission. Very few churches are growing so fast that they'll say, man, we would love to see the same growth 5 years from now. Okay? Most of our churches are not there. And another question again, how would you describe mission success in your local community or in our local community? But then I push them farther. How would you describe mission success in your city, in your county, in your state, and worldwide in 5 years? What am I doing again? I'm challenging my leaders to think beyond us, right? Think city, state, and so on, which is really the multiplication movement, the missional movement that Jesus had passion for, the disciples had passion for, the Adventist Church had passion for. We send missionaries not only to different parts of U.S., but over to Europe, you know, where I come from. And I wouldn't be a Christian today if these missionaries were not sent there. I wouldn't be a Seventh-day Adventist, okay? Moving to the next one, the C. It stands for connect. As we build a vision, we have to cast this picture with our messaging about what our mission and church ministry could be if we really lived with a God-sized vision. We also try to influence our leaders to get into that missional mindset, but then we need to connect them we need to connect this vision we're trying to build about church planting to their real life passions. What does that mean in more practical terms? Number one, I ask our leaders I'm not going to go in the order things are on the screen, but I'm going to just start bringing this stuff, one at a time. But I want to bring the vision closer to their heart, this missional thinking. So I'm going to ask them, okay, what are some of the people that you know that are not in the church today that you would love to see become a part of God's community? You know what? Each one of us, if I asked you right now to give me names, will give me names of people that are dear to your heart. Brothers, family members, friends. I grew up in an atheist country of Bulgaria. We were 9 really good friends. 7 of my friends are still not Christians, not Seventh-day Adventists. They're not Christians, period. They're still atheists. Only one of them joined, and thank God he joined the Adventist church. You know what? I still pray for these people. And I remember I was at this place, and they were asking me, why do you pray for them? My first baptism in the first district where I was the lead pastor, the senior pastor, was a lady whose brother has prayed for 27 years. And all of a sudden, we visited, she comes to town, and all this stuff is happening in her life. She comes to church, and she comes to me and says, Pastor, I want to be baptized. She didn't even tell her brother that. Anyway, why I'm telling you this story, I was at the point where I was getting discouraged to pray for my friends, okay? Those 7 guys I was telling you about. And when this happened and he told me he had prayed for 27 years, I said, I'm going to keep on praying, and I'm still keeping on praying today. It's beyond 27 years, by the way, for me. But I know God will lead them to Jesus. Each one of your leaders has a story like that. People they care for. You have to help their minds connect with that. So the next question I ask after I tell them, hey, think of a person, that you would like to be at church. I ask them, think of where they live. Because a lot of times these people live in areas where there is no congregation that is reaching out to them. Again, I'm trying to stir their minds that unless we go to new areas and new places, somebody's loved one will not be reached, right? Okay, another thing, I want to learn about what the passion of my members are. So I start talking to them about, okay, what are you passionate about? Not just a church, okay? Could be a social thing. I had this friend who was passionate about skiing. So I'm like, oh, that's great, okay? Why am I asking those questions about their passions? Because I bring up to them the whole idea of living a lifestyle of evangelism, of outreach, of mission, living a missional lifestyle every day. So the next thing I talk to them about when I visit one-on-one is, okay, well, so I'm very interested, how could you use that passion of yours to connect people with Jesus? Okay? Because they all have their passion. So now I'm taking the passion of Jesus to reach the unchurched, connected to the passion of the leaders I have, and I'm also talking about, hey, think about the people, the areas that are not being reached, that someone dearly wishes that those people will be connected with Jesus in some way. I'm expanding the horizon again to go beyond us. Another thing I asked them to, in our leadership meetings, in our board meetings, I remember in this church that I was trying to push towards planting.
Water?
Excuse me, I'll take some water. I'm okay. But I remember in a board meeting, I was asking them, okay, guys, so if we are to reach, thank you, appreciate it. If we are to reach all these people, okay, that are not being reached at the moment, right, in our community, how would we do that? How would you go about reaching some of the community people, the unchurched people in our community? And so I just let them talk about ideas and all that. But then what I want also to make them think about is that we don't need to only, we shouldn't be thinking only about new geographic areas that are unreached, but maybe about new people groups. What am I talking about? Jean, you're reaching to Chinese people, right? Did you know that in Houston, one of the areas with a real huge Chinese population, we had absolutely not even one Chinese group, Adventist group that was meeting together. Until Scott Griswold came and was talking to us about reaching, minority groups, and immigrant groups, and he brought it to our attention. I was the church planting coordinator. I never thought, I was in my first year, never really thought that there are that many Chinese people and that we don't have a church there. It takes awareness to make us think differently. So Houston has lots of Adventist churches and no ministry that reaches to the Chinese people. We need to keep challenging our leaders and ourselves with that, because that makes us realize, man, we need to shift our vision to involve not only our ministry here in the local church, but go beyond our walls to incorporate church planting, which really is reaching to new demographic areas and new people groups, communities of people, unchurched people who don't know Jesus yet. Okay? Another question to ask your leaders. If we were to plant a church today, okay, what are the 2 places or people groups that you would feel most passionate to reach? Okay, that's what I will ask in my board meeting. We haven't even talked about a church plant yet with my leaders. I was asking them this question. Okay, if we are to plant a church today, what are the 2 places or 2 people groups that you are passionate about reaching? Why am I doing that? First, to see where their interest is, because that's where we'll do the first church plant eventually, but also because I'm listening. God speaks, even though I have the passion for church planting, God will speak through my leaders to maybe open my eyes about where the church plant needs to happen. As a coordinator, guess what happened when I heard Scott Griswold talk about? He'll say the first 2 plants I'll do, one of the first 2 plants I'll do in Houston will be for the Chinese. So I said, wow, thank you, God, for letting me hear your will through someone else who was aware, who had a passion for these people. Same thing will happen in your among your local leaders as you talk to them. All right? Again, what are we doing? We're connecting God's passion for mission and multiplication we're connecting God's vision for mission and multiplication to our leaders' passions. Okay? All right? And by the way, write those down as they share. You have a few other questions, suggestions for questions. You can ask them in your handout, but just some of them are here on the screen. We're just going to skip for time, and then you can go back and look at those. Okay, the next step in building this vision for church planting and multiplication in your existing church is to start training your leaders in church for growth and multiplication. What does that really mean in real term? Okay, you will grow. Your church will grow as big as your leaders believe it could be. You might be 30 people planting a church, okay? You will grow as big as your mind is saying you will become, all right? So if you think, well, in this place, I would doubt that we're going to reach beyond 100 people, guess how big you're going to grow? About 80, 90, maybe 100, okay? Because everything you do, you will do with that mentality. We are going to be a church for 100 people. What I like doing is I like training my people for the size of a church that I think we will become. So all the training I do, okay, is related to our vision is to become in, like, let's say 3-5 years, okay? So first thing I will do, I will train for growth that God wants to bring to us. Does God want us to be congregations of 50 people? Maybe some areas, yes, okay. But I want us to be ready to become 150, 200, 300, 500 people church. So the training I do with them is with the idea that we're going to grow big as God wants us to be. Again, it's not about numbers, but it's about openness to God's big vision. Okay? The second thing I train them also, I try to develop a culture for multiplying leaders and disciples. Before your church can multiply, before you can church plant, you need to start multiplying on local level. What do you multiply? Disciples, leaders, and ministries. Multiplication always leads to growth. If you have a church and you have only 2 Sabbath school groups, you're going to reach this number of people that attend them, and your attendance will stop. The 2 Sabbath school groups are not going to grow beyond a certain attendance. If you add 2 more Sabbath school groups, your attendance will always increase, guaranteed. I'm not even talking of how healthy they are. Because multiplication leads to growth. People connect with different people, you create more options, you create different spaces and environments that different people will connect to. So I develop a culture for multiplying leaders and disciples. I challenge my leaders. I ask them, okay, who are you going to invest into to develop as the next leader for our church? Why do we do that? Why do we train for multiplication? How does that relate to church planting? If I'm going to send out a church plant core team, and I'm going to send out my youth leader, and by the way, I always encourage my plants to send the best out. Okay, because if a church plant is going to succeed, they need the best leadership. We can survive here because we have all these people around us, but they need the best, okay? If I send my best children's ministries leader, who is going to take their place? We'll talk later about, objections that the churches have, but these are valid objections. I used to tell people who wanted to join church plants in Texas, you cannot join the core team. Not only you shouldn't, I am not going to let you join the core team until you take 2 to 3 months to build up or train your replacement. Now, there are times when you have to step out for people to step into leadership, but the best thing is to really try to find your replacement as you are ready to leave. So the mother church is not left with a gap, okay? And the next part of in this training process is I want to develop a database of people's spiritual gifts and their ministry profile. What is a ministry profile? If you're not familiar with it, it includes your passion, spiritual gifts, and your personal style. Who am I passionate to serve? How am I going to serve them? And what is the most comfortable way for me to be involved in that ministry? And that's, you might want to look into spiritual gifts trainings and assessment processes to get those. But I want to start building a database with people with their spiritual gifts and ministry profiles, because among those people then I want now to look for possible core members for the future plan. Okay? So as I train people in spiritual gifts, including my leaders, as I look at their ministry profiles, I am trying to look for potential people who can be a part of the new plant, and I start investing more time with them. What are we doing? We're preparing our church to multiply and plant. I'm trying to look for those leaders who will become a part of that. Multiplication is a culture. It must start happening in the life of your church in order for the church itself to consider multiplying. Very few churches plant a new church before they have started multiplying their leaders and their ministries. Okay? Questions to ask? What adjustments would we need to make today in our ministry if God brought 500 people right now into our church? And this includes, by the way, what adjustments are we going to make to our structure? What adjustments are we going to make to our facility? What adjustments are we going to make to the way we disciple and train people? I mean, if right now God brought 500 people to your church, what do you need to change? And then I thought, challenge my leaders, how about we start preparing for it? If we believe God is big and if we're going to grow, let's start doing this. And one of the discussions that always comes here as we talk about this question is, well, Pastor, but we don't have space for 500 people. We can't build a new church. We can't build a new building. Guess what I bring up? Well, what other options are there to fit these people? Because they all don't live right here, right? Maybe we can start another church, right? Okay, you see how you're slowly letting your people get comfortable with the idea that this is not only missional, but it's also practical. It's part of our expanding evangelism strategy. Okay, can you define your ministry profile? I'll ask my leaders, because you will be surprised how many church leaders don't know their spiritual gifts. They don't know how to serve. They don't know, they've served out of duty, okay, not out of calling. And they are miserable and they don't know how to help other people serve out of calling, okay? And they make other people miserable when they invite, them to serve in church ministries. So I asked them, hey, do you know your ministry profile? And some of them I never asked them, have you done spiritual gifts assessment? I always say, hey, I want to do it with everyone in case you haven't done it the way I went through it, okay? Now, I don't put them on the spot to say, oh, well, I'm embarrassed to say I haven't done it and I've been an elder for, 20 years, right? Or 30 years, whatever. But I will take them through this basic assessment, spiritual gifts, personal passions, the APAS test, and all this stuff is stuff that you will learn in the other seminars that we teach in our church planting curriculum. Okay, another question to ask is our current church ministry culture set to encourage multiplication and discipleship? Okay, in other words, is the way we run things being if we keep the way we're running things right now, does that stimulate you or push you or compel you to mentor others? A lot of times, we as pastors or we as leaders, we don't invest in people, but we ask them to invest in others. I had an elder once who I remember I was talking to from this church plant who were trying to help start in another church. He said, well, I've never been mentored, so how do I mentor somebody else? And we were talking about starting a church plant. Multiplication, mentoring, training, coaching wasn't part of that culture. So be sure that, you build that, you model it to your members so they know how to pass it to others. And finally, this is in this area, I always ask people when we train, what are the 1 to 2 people you are currently investing into? And if you don't have any, please write 1 or 2 names, start praying for them, and start creating a plan of how you are going to invest in them. If it's ministry leaders, my board, I will tell them, okay, who are you investing in? Next time we visit, I will ask you for the names. Okay, and then, I also try to be sure that they know how to visit and multiply, and mentor those people as well. But we need to create this culture of multiplication because it will translate into the future vision for planting. The U. By the way, what time are we supposed to finish? Okay, so we have time. All right. U stays from unleashing creativity. One of my challenges as I was growing up in the church was when I was a part of my dad's church, things were good. My dad is a very empowering leader, so I was used to that. We were young guys, and he will empower them. What does it mean to empower, to be an empowering leader? That means that if you give me a task, you don't tell me, hey, okay, here is the task, here is the 3 things I want you to do, and then I'll keep you accountable if you did them. Okay? That's not empowering leadership. Empowering leadership says, hey, listen, I'm going to share with you what you're going to be working on. I'm going to give you some ideas, and now I'm going to let you be creative with it and go and tackle this task. If you need help, I'm here to help you. All right? The difference is that in one case, I'm telling you what you need to do, and you might have totally different vision and approach to how to do that ministry. In the other case, I'm giving you the basics, but I'm saying, hey, it's an open field. You decide, pray and decide how God wants you to tackle it. I encourage creativity. And I've always been surprised how amazing this process is when you encourage other people to be creative. God gives other people better ideas than you will ever have if you lead by yourself. So I remember this church that we moved to the capital to, and it has a different pastor, and you know, he wanted us to help with the youth, but he had 3 particular tasks he wanted us to do. So we really felt like we were his, how do I say it? Not slaves, but his kind of like, not robots, what's the correct word? Can you help me out? I mean, like his agents to just do his 3 things, okay? And so if they failed, it was almost like we felt guilty that his ideas failed. And we finally said, we're not participating in this, okay? Until there was a pastoral change and the new pastor came and said, hey, would you guys help? It was 3 of us. Would you help with youth ministry? But he encouraged us, did some training with us, and then said, now you guys go create a plan and come and tell me what you want to do. So he would hold us accountable afterwards based on what we said we were going to do, not what he told us to do. Again, building this empowering ministry and unleashing creativity. So allow God to inspire the people, the leaders that you have. Because when you start a church plant, this same thing will transpire to your church plant. If you cannot unleash the creativity of your current leaders, you will never unleash the creativity of those who you have invited to be a part of the new church plant that will be happening. Empower leaders to dream and lead. Might be different dream than yours because they're going to be working in a different context. It doesn't have to happen my way, right? It's very hard to do because we need to unleash control and leave it in God's hands, okay? But with unleashing control and inspiring others, empowering them to do leadership, we need to also create a system of accountability. If we just empower people, especially new leaders, and you let them loose, they'll be very creative, but they might get distracted from the real goal, the real vision, the real purpose, okay? So what is a good accountability system that you need to have while you let your leaders be led by God and dream and vision and create things? You need to have a check on these 4 things. Number 1, you need to provide a support system for their spiritual development. Sometimes when we get busy working for God, we forget to have our time with God. And in church planting, it's hard work. Within probably after the first year, maybe a year and a half, I started seeing my leaders, my key leaders in my church plant, about 12 of them, they started struggling spiritually, some of them. And you know what I found out? They were feeding others, but there was nothing to feed them. I had failed to create this environment where they can come and not teach, not do duties, and be in charge of things, but just be there to feed on God's word, to share, to pray together. And so we try to do that. We try to get our team together, have these spiritual retreats when we'll just spend time together. We also started having me and our elders have a visit with one of our ministry leader every month. One of us will visit with one of our ministry leaders every month. And the main purpose for that was the first main item on the agenda was, hey, how are you doing spiritually? How is your faith? And that's when you really see how hard Satan is working to discourage your leaders, all right? Have that way of spiritual, and you can design it the way you want, but have a way to be sure that spiritual nurturing for your leaders is happening. The second thing that's important, check alignment. Check their alignment with the shared vision. The second question, we're saying, I was asking him, how are things going? What are you doing? It wasn't just to hear how ministry is going, but to see, are they aligned with the vision of multiplication and church planting we are creating, or whatever your church vision is? or are they going outside of that? The third one is check their alignment with the overall strategy. Okay, we've talked as a church about doing things. Now, I'm open to changing the strategy. Okay, so maybe a leader comes and says, you know what, you guys, the parameters we set are handicapping us. So what should we do? We can revisit and change the strategy, but I want to be sure that they are within the strategy, because if we chose a particular strategy, there is a reason for it, right? If they go around and then they go ahead with certain steps, it can ruin the whole strategy, the whole multiplication process. So I want them to feel free, and we try to create an environment where they can freely discuss what are the challenges, what we need to adjust, but also I want to be sure that they are working as a team with us, okay? And this is what the last part comes to. We ask the questions, okay, what are the changes we need to make? I guess, I'm sorry, the wording there is not right, now I realize. But what are the things that we need to keep? What is going well? What are the things we need to eliminate because they're hindering our mission? And what are the things we need to add to our strategy? Okay? And this happens usually not only at our once-a-year visioning meeting that we do with all the leaders and all the ministry teams that we used to do in my church, but this will happen every time we met with a leader. I'll ask them, hey, anything we need to add, anything, what's going well, what is not going well, what's hindering you, anything we're missing in order to support you in ministry. I had a president who used to say, if you fail in ministry, it will be either because you don't want to follow what God has called you to do, or you are just too lazy, okay? I mean, you're too lazy to do the work, okay? But I want to give you everything I can so you can be a successful minister. That's what I try to tell my leaders. I might not know it. I might have to bring an expert here, but I'll give you everything I can for you to be successful, okay? Just tell me what you need. That's all I ask from you. Communicate with me, and we'll do everything we can. So if we fail, it will be either because, I'm sorry, I misspoke. It's either because you don't want to do what God has called you to do, or it's not God's will. Okay? First one is because you're lazy. I mean, you just don't want to do what God has called you to do. Or the second one is we're trying to do something and God says, no, not going to happen. There are times when God stops even the best visions because we've gone ahead of him, or, we're not aligned with his mission and ministry. And there is no point of fighting God. Okay? So you get the pictures here, right? We empower, we encourage creativity, but we create accountability system to be sure that everything that happens is aligned with the overall vision and missional and mission that we have set for our church, okay? The only way to become the best in anything that we do is to feel free to fail while trying. I never take a leader out because they have failed, but I will take a leader out because they don't want to keep trying. So, things failed, it's okay. What else can we try? We just learned another way not to do things. You remember Thomas Edison, right? When he did about 1,000 attempts at creating the light bulb, and he said, well, I know 1,000 ways to not do it, right? That's what failing is all about. It's about learning and progress, okay? Questions to, I'm sorry, it went, I went back, I'm sorry. All right? Questions to ask. Now as we are, training our people, and as I am challenging and empowering them, now I am trying to bring them more to think about church planting again. Adding church planting to our existing vision. This assumes that the church already has an existing vision. So I asked them, okay, can you choose 2 to 3 most unchurched areas in your city, in our city, that you are passionate about? Okay, I'm bringing them back. We asked a similar question earlier. I'm bringing them back to it. If we are to plant a church today, where would you plant it? Give me 2 or 3 areas. And they will always tell you, you know what, there was this guy I remember saying, I always drive through that community. I've always thought that it will be a nice thing to have a church there. And yet he was one of the people who never wanted to become a church planting church, okay? It's funny how these people have a passion, but they don't want to respond to it, okay? But they'll always say, hey, you know, there is a place that they're passionate about that they will bring up. The other thing, what I do here, once we talk about these areas, I try to find one area that we all agree is ripe for planting. Okay, remember, this is my ministry leaders, my board and ministry leaders. And so then what I will do is I'll say, okay, well, let's check for next time. Let's see what we can learn about that community. Okay, I'm preparing them to make planting a church a part of our vision there. I say, well, let's look at that community. What is let's do some research of defining what that community is. What's their age, income, makeup, education, the felt needs that they have or the real needs that they have, their faith receptivity, and so on, okay? So for next time, I actually, without asking for a permission, I bring the demographics. And I say, by the way, we talked about that community. I found it very interesting to see who lives there. And I give them this report that we have prepared, okay? Sometimes, by this point, your church board or ministry leaders or your church will be like, well, you know what? We should do something about that area. So they'll be involved in it. Other times, they're still not ready. But I keep pushing this, right? I bring the demographics there. I'm trying to introduce them to that area. And in the meantime, I'm praying for God now to open their hearts and minds to planting. Okay? And then the last question, again, that I'll bring up once I bring that report to them, the next question I ask is, okay, if we are to plant a church for this area, what would that church be like now when you see this report? I'm trying again to make them think, you know, what would it look like if we plant a church there and push them towards, you know, that big step. That's the next step we talked about. And then what we do is we move to the R. Now, this is a very important step as you lead your church leaders to get to a point to plant, okay? What you are doing with the R is now, you've already told them, show them the need for being missional, that we should reach out to this new community or this new people group. Now you're trying to remove all those thoughts that Satan puts in their minds to say, oh, we shouldn't do that, you know, because, oh, no, but we cannot, it's a good idea, but we cannot do it, okay? I'm trying to remove these roadblocks, these objections, okay? So here is the first two objections that will always come when you start talking now about planting. They'll be like, but Pastor, we will lose people. If we plant, we'll lose people. Will we lose people? Yes, we will, right? I mean, we have to send people out, okay? And it might be 20, 30 people, depending on your size, or 10 people, it will hurt. I mean, of course, the first step is you're going to see these empty spots in church. The second objection is we will lose money. We need the money for our ministry, right? What are we going to do, especially if we still have to pay off our church? I had a friend of mine who could not get through this second hurdle, and he said, okay, if we pay off this church, are you going to be ready to plant? And the board said, yes, we will. Well, this buddy of mine, he started, Tom Evans, you might know him. He actually, what he did is he went on a campaign, and they paid off their church within 2 years. And guess what he did? The Saturday, they paid off the church. He introduced his church planting team because the leaders had already committed to it, all right? But you got to think through this because for some churches, this is a big objective. Will we lose people? It's a big deal. Now, have we prepared already our leaders for that one? We will lose people, and most probably we'll lose leaders as well. We already talked about multiplying leaders, right? So now I will tell them, hey, this is why we kept multiplying leaders. So when one of these leaders steps out, we have someone else to take their place. But I also take them through statistics, okay? This is a case study in North Dallas that I used with a lot of the churches when I had to process through these objections. In the North Dallas area, we had the Dallas First Church, which is a kind of in central Dallas, and then the Richardson Church, and then there was a Brazilian church, okay? these were the main churches there, at least in the kind of the north and northeast part of Dallas. So the Richardson Church had 490 people attending in 2000, and the membership was 654, okay? So what the Richardson Church decided to do, remember when they paid off, they would pay off their, this is the same church I was telling about, when they pay off their mortgage, they were going to do their first church plant, okay? So they did their first church plant, and then, this was about, I think it was about 2002, 2003 when they did their first church plant. Then what happened is they continued planting. They planted a Spanish church, which became, by the way, 400 people within 4 years, okay? And then we were the third church they were planting, the Crosswalk Fellowship was the third church plant out of that church. But Richardson, the little yellow dot in the middle, became a mother church to all these 7 churches up there, okay? Now, by 2008, these 7 churches had a total attendance of 900. How much was the Richardson attendance? About 500, okay? Guess the Richardson attendance didn't go down, it went up, okay? But I want you to see the total attendance. What happened to the total attendance for the whole area? From 500, it jumped to 900 people, okay? The membership jumped from 600 and whatever it was to over 1,000, okay? Then we go to 2014. All the church plants, including the previous ones, the total church plants out of the Richardson Church were 12 churches plus 1 plant that was still going. And by the way, there is that black dot, that's 1 plant that failed. It was an ethnic plant. They made some major mistakes, didn't listen to our counseling. A church of 60 people was killed by the wrong leader, okay, that they selected and they hold on to. So even though we lost 1 church, we still had 13 church plants there. Attendance grew to 1,536. Membership grew to over 2,000 people, okay? So I want now to show you the slide. I'm just going to jump to the next slide because of time. In 2018, the Richardson Church had attendance of 600 people. Did they lose people to all these 12 plants that they started in 2002? They were losing people, right? I mean, they were sending people, technically losing people, and losing money, right? Look at what happened at the end. The Richardson Church had attendance of about 210 people more. This is, and by the way, the rule of thumb is this, and I missed to tell you that. Every time they plant it, within 6 months, their church will fill up again to where it was before. Within 6 months. Their tithe giving that went down after people left will come not only to the same level within 6 months, but will increase beyond the level it was before. So by 2018, Richardson had over 1,000 members, 610 people attending, and their tithe had grown to $1.3 million. Okay? But look at what happened to the overall picture. If in 2018 we had only the Richardson Church, maybe some of these other people would have stayed with it, but let's say the Richardson Church had 1,000 people. How many churches, Adventist churches, do you know that have 1,000 people attending, not members? Very few, and they're usually university churches, okay? Richardson Church would have probably never been over 1,000 people if you look at our statistics. But the total church attendance with these 18 churches by now, 14 churches plus 4 new church plants by 2018, the attendance of the total attendance of all these church plants and the Richardson Church was 2,229 people. When would have the Richardson Church have that much of an attendance? And you know what? I'm going to predict something that in 50 years, the Richardson Church will still not have probably 2,000 people attending. Unless they do some major things, they build a new building and so on. And I hope that they will, they grow to that, but that's just the reality. They reach this, each church reaches this ceiling. Membership has grown to 3,700 people, the tithe of all the churches, 3.9 million. Do we lose people? Do we lose money? No. Within 6 months, in all the church plants in Texas, I was the church planting coordinator for 5 years. Every single church that planted, mother church that planted, their attendance will get back between 6 to 9 months to the level it was, and their money will always go beyond what it was. We had a Spanish church that sent $80,000 with a new group to plant a new church. $80,000. We didn't have one English church that gave that much money. You know what that Spanish church did just last year? They were ready to send another plant with another $80,000. And if you know the people, the reason I'm bringing up that church, they are not wealthy people, okay? So those first two objections, statistics show that the church will gain the people within 6 to 9 months that they have sent out. Their money that will come to not only the same level, but will increase. The next objection is, we cannot plant, Pastor, because we are not healthy enough. You know what I usually say with this? Two things. How would you feel if I say, well, I'm not healthy enough to have babies with my wife. We both are not healthy enough to have kids yet. We're trying to become in better health. I mean, okay, will we ever have perfect health? No, we'll always have issues, right? But if we are not healthy enough to have healthy babies, then what should we do? Say we're not going to have kids? How about asking the other question? How can we become healthy enough, or what would it take to be healthy enough in order to plan? So we try to create this list. Okay, what will make us feel we are healthy enough? We make the list, let's move towards it. So then we can go and plan. Next one, we are not full yet. Have you ever heard this? Church is saying, we have space here. Well, the Richardson Church, thank goodness, was full at that time. But just because you're not full enough doesn't mean your church will gonna get fuller. Okay? Does it make sense? Because there are other factors that affect why you're not full enough. Maybe you've reached the 80% of your seating capacity, which is a kind of a barrier for growth. Maybe you've reached 80% of your parking space, depending on where you are. If you're a very urban church, then it's different. Maybe your leadership has reached its capacity, whatever. But just because you're full enough, you're not full enough, doesn't mean that you shouldn't have churches. You shouldn't plant churches. What it means is you need to ask yourself, okay, what will help us grow? And here is something else that I want to share with you. I always tell churches, don't stop growing just because you start planting. Does it make sense? If God blesses you as a planting church to become 2,000 people, do it. There is room for mega churches, even though they're not the most effective in everything. Let's have mega churches. The issue is not mega churches. The issue is your church missional enough to plant? If God blesses it to become 10,000 people, be the first Adventist church in U.S. that has 10,000 people, it's okay. The question is, are you being missional and reaching out and planting? So, are we full or not yet? Doesn't mean that we shouldn't be missional and reach out to new communities. Next one, we will lose key leaders. Okay? Well, so the appropriate question is, what are you doing to train and multiply new leaders so when your leader leaves, you have someone to take your place? By the way, whenever a leader leaves, God always moves people to take the vacuum, fill up the vacuum. When we were leaving, my wife was the children's ministries leader, and we had a lady that was willing to take that position. She ended up moving away, away from Texas. So right before we left, we really didn't have anyone to take my wife's place. But we had to move here to Potomac. And so we just decided, okay, we'll pray. And my wife had organized the team of 4 people just to carry the ministry there until the church found a good replacement. I just spoke to them. It's been about, 2.5 months since we've left. I just spoke to them today. They said, oh, no, this week is children's church. Oh, we have a new leader. Someone stepped up, and they're doing an excellent job, but they just felt intimidated that they wouldn't do it as well as my wife would before, okay? God always brings leaders as people step up to go plant, but it's better if we multiply leaders so there is no leadership void and gap, okay? And finally, we want to grow larger. Pastor, we just want to be a larger church because we can do better ministry. Just because we plant again doesn't mean that we don't continue to grow. So I take these objections by sharing with them statistics, talking to my leaders about, what's the reality, and then I say, okay, so if these are not the issue, are we ready to plant? Are we ready to make church planting a part of our larger vision? So if mission is to be successful, it will require for us to send out our best. When we talk about leaders, I always tell my church, think about the church of Antioch, okay? In the book of Acts. Who did they send? Pastor Tim talked about it yesterday. Paul and Barnabas, they're best people. Because they said, you guys can go and do this ministry better than anyone else. We can carry the work here. We need to learn to send our best. Okay, here is my question that I ask also in this stage when we talk about church planting and we talk about what will we lose, even if we lose everything. My question to my leaders is this: how much will you be willing to give if you knew that giving it up will save 1,000 people? So if you are my church, I'll tell you, okay, if we, by planting, had to close our doors, but we knew that these plants we're going to start are going to lose 1,000 people, is it worth closing our doors? For most of our churches, they'll say, yeah, 1,000 people versus 150, yes, we'll close our doors to have a church that's going to become 1,000 people. Are we willing to give? The question is, how much are you willing to give to make God do greater things than what we were ever able to do? Okay? I would close 3 churches if we can gain another 500 people for the kingdom. Because, if you're a believer, you'll always stay a believer. You're going to go and find another place to worship. But those people who are not believers, unless we create a space for them, they are just going to go, and they're going to go forever and be lost forever. Okay? Last one, E. Establish a 3 to 5 year multiplication plan. Now we move our church after we have processed through all these previous steps. Now we start talking, okay, as we plan our next cycle of evangelism in our future, how can we incorporate church planting into our existing 3 to 5 year plan? And here are some of the steps that I take our church at this point. Now again, we've already processed through God's vision. We've learned how to multiply ministries, leaders. We are preparing, people, a pool of people who might go out. We've talked about the objections. We are ready to. We've talked about the possible 1 or 2 areas we're going to plant, what that will look like. As we start planning for that, I want us to focus on 4 things. Number 1, I want us to define what does the success in our new vision, what will success look like, okay? And you should do that in any vision that you have. Define success so you have something to measure, all right? So what will success in church planting look like? Planting 1 church, 2 churches, 5 churches? What will we consider success? Do a SWOT analysis. Do you know what that is? You've heard of that term? Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. What are we good at? What are we not good at? What are our growth areas? What are the opportunities out there? And what's the competition? What can threaten our planting? We need to be clear on that. Then we need to set a strategy, strategic objectives and road markers of how are we going to work through this using our strengths, improving our weaknesses, using the opportunities and avoiding the threats or preparing to face the threats. How are we going to do that? Strategic objectives for that. And then finally, we create the roadmap, the strategic plan that each one of our ministries need to adopt in order to fulfill the ultimate mission, that ultimate 3 to 5 year plan. And of course, you do that with a lot of prayer, because it is only God who can make this succeed. And here are the two questions I ask. I ask, okay, what would God say about this plan if he saw it today? Will it say, guys, this is you act like you're scared, okay? It's like I'm not the big God anymore, that I can do things, okay? Or will God say, you know what, this is too big for me? By the way, I use those words with my leaders. Will God ever say that? Now, he might say, you've gone different direction than where I'm leading you, okay? I'm not going to let everything you've planned happen, but if we prayerfully consider God's plan, God should say, hey, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful in the little, now let me show you the big things I have for you. And then, of course, the next question, which is similar, is how much harder did we make this plan that we adopted now for God, especially since we included now in this plan the church plant we never felt we were ready to do before. How much harder did we make it compared to our plan that we used to have without church planting, being a part of it? You understand the idea? Did we make it harder on God by adding the church planting element to our vision? There is nothing hard for God, okay? I'm trying to make our leaders realize we better step up and measure up to God's dreams rather than being limited by what we think is possible, okay? So those 6 steps, using the acronym PLANT, are what I like taking my churches through in order to prepare them to plant. And then at this point is where now I will start looking for by this time I would do it on my own, but as a church we'll start looking for the best leader to head that plant. We kind of have already 1 or 2 locations we've considered. We have people who have gone through spiritual gifts trainings. We know their gifts. We know which ones of them spiritual. We have a pool of people who have gone through spiritual gifts assessments and gifts assessment. So we know who are the potential people who can be a part of the core team. From this point on is when we begin to apply the process that Pastor Steve Leddy is covering today, or I think he is, or Tim Matting. One of them is talking about how to put together a core team and create a strategy for development. But these are the steps that you can take with your church to prepare them for future planting. Any questions that you have? I know it's a lot of information probably, and you have it in the handout. The PowerPoints will be available as well. Always feel free to call for help. Any questions? Yeah.
I've never taken the spiritual assessment. So how do I take it?
Spiritual gifts assessment?
Yeah.
Okay. Just talk to me. I can send you an assessment, the whole process, or what church do you go to? Ask your pastor and see if they have something. Usually every church will have it, but a lot of people don't know about it. Okay. We used to announce it in our church, and then still people will say, oh, I've never heard about that, So, but if you don't find it, talk to me. I'll give you one. I can send it to you. You can go over it, and then we can connect, or you can connect with your pastor and walk through it. But it walks you through a good spiritual gifts assessment. Will walk you through you discovering your passion, which really means if you gave me, let's say, a group of 1,000 people, and you split it in different demographics, with kids without parents, single moms, families, young adults, kids. You can split it a lot of different ways. Which is the group you're most passionate about? I know for me it's unchurched young adults, even though I'm not a young adult anymore. Because I grew up in an environment where it was atheism. There were 3 Christians in our school, not Adventists, 3 Christians in a school of 1,800 people. So my passion is to connect with these young adults who don't believe that God exists, because I've gone through it, I've dealt with it, okay? So passion, the second step in that is discovering our spiritual gifts, makeup, and that includes a couple of things, the regular spiritual gifts, the APES test, are you an apostle, prophet, shepherd, teacher, So you know, that's the second part, and the third part is discovering our personal style. Are you structured and unstructured, people, person, goal-oriented? That's the simple test. You can go into some of the more complicated tests as well. But basically figuring out, you know, how do I work? If I like teaching young adults, am I more comfortable teaching one-on-one or in a group? Okay. How will I approach teaching? Do I need materials? Do I need the freedom to create? I mean, there are a lot of things that go into that. And then at the end, you create your own ministry profile that tells you, hey, here are some, and you discuss it with a coach to tell you, here are the possible potential ministries that I am, you know, I'm good in serving into. So.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? All right. Thank you, guys. Blessings in whatever you do, and we're available at any point if questions arise to come and talk to us. So.